Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, hi everybody. Happy Memorial Day. I'm Melissa C. I'm a recovered compulsive overeater. I am in New York and really happy to be here tonight on this holiday. And tonight I'm going to be talking about working with others and probably getting through, I would say, half of the chapter because it really is a pretty meaty chapter. It's rich, and I don't want to shortchange it.
Is the
So,
chicken okay?
whoop,
Yeah.
thank you. If you are unmuted, please mute yourself. Anyway, so before I jump into this chapter, I think it's always good to kind of qualify to kind of tell people like who I am and what gives me the ability to do this important work, this work with others, because the requirement for working with others is one, I've had to have done the work myself. I have to be someone who has done the work myself. And I have to be a person who has required doing this work myself. So, meaning like if I did not have this specific problem, I would not have the qualifications in order to do this work. And so, what is my problem? Well, my problem is that I have a food addiction. But I'm a very specific type of food addict because, you know, I am of the hopeless variety. And I think that's important because we can be addicted to lots of things. And once we put it down, never to use it again, we don't really require anything other than that. So this is a program, working with others is I have to be a very specific type of addict, someone who is addicted to food and addicted to food behaviors. Because I mean, I'll just give you a little bit of my background. In my youth, I was a cigarette smoker and I put it down and I did not require a spiritual awakening. I was definitely addicted to cigarettes, 100%. It was hard to quit. It was really uncomfortable. And I'm pretty certain that if I pick up cigarettes again, I would be a smoker again. I don't think I'd have the ability to be a casual smoker. So I know I can't smoke. Um, and I drank too much at different points in my life. I but I don't believe I crossed the line into alcoholism. And the reason I can say that is I put down the alcohol and I did not need to go to Alcoholics Anonymous in order to keep from drinking again. But I don't think I could drink without triggering a strange response. But my food addiction was an entirely different breed because I have been entirely abstinent. And then knowing everything that I know about the dangers of food and even very specific foods in a state of entire abstinence, knowing that I should not eat a certain food because it does something to me that sets something off, I have been unable to use my willpower, my intelligence, my, knowledge, any of it, no human support to keep myself from eating again. So I am of the type with whom all other methods had failed completely, except good news, not this method. And so I crawled my way back into Overeaters Anonymous yet again, because that was my story. I was one of those, I would get a little bit better and then leave. And every time I had to come back, there was the humiliation of having to come back. I never wanted to come back unless I was the victor. Like I only wanted to come back if I've lost a little bit of the weight that I put back on, which is crazy, right? I wouldn't want to go. I would say, well, I'll go back to that meeting when I take that weight off that I just put on. Well, then I really didn't need that meeting, did I? Right? If I could have done that on my own, I would have. So I came back in again. And at that point, I realized that what I was going to require was a brand new me. And I, came back in, I was over 300 pounds. My life was in shambles. I had dangerously high blood pressure. I needed to have a hysterectomy. They didn't want to operate on me because my blood pressure was out of control because of my weight. Um, I wanted to die, but I didn't. I couldn't imagine living like this any longer. I wanted to die, but I didn't want to kill myself. And that's really where I came in. And at that point, I surrendered. I let go absolutely. And I worked the 12 steps through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I had a spiritual awakening. I was relieved of over 160 pounds, and I've been entirely abstinent, living in a recovered state for over 11 years now, 11 and a half years. And so I have the qualifications to do this work with others, which is a blessing because it's the best work of my life. It's the greatest gift of my life. So let's jump into the chapter now that we know what the requirement is to do this work with others. And we're going to find out what are the benefits that we get doing this work, why we do it. So on page 89, the first paragraph says, practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with alcoholics. You can help when no one else can. Remember, they're ill. They're very ill. So let's look at that for a second. It talks about immunity. And immunity, if you look it up, it's the ability of an organism to resist a particular infection or toxin by the action of specific antibodies or sensitized white blood cells. Like I looked it up and I found that's what it says. And immunity is also protection or exemption from something, especially an obligation or a penalty. And immunity is also a lack of susceptibility, especially to something unwelcome or harmful. So I think about it like this is my immunization, this is my injection. It's how we stay safe and protected. And so, just like getting an immunization, when they put a little bit of the organism inside of you so that you build up the antibodies to fight against it, that's the kind of contact that I need to have with the still sick and suffering, where I'm in close contact with them, where I somehow get antibodies, I somehow get protection from that close work that I do with others. And and so the work that I do, it's like my injection, my shot. And it's not one of those that you get one. I think I had like one when I was little of polio and I never had to do it again. This seems to require boosters, lots of boosters, frequent boosters all the time. And so what I get from it is protection, not from the allergy. What I get protection from is the desire to put things in my body, in my mouth that I know are problematic for me. That's what I get protection from. I get protection from the strange mental blank spot. I don't seem to have that strange mental blank spot anymore. And I think also the other thing that the immunization does, this immunity does, is it actually makes those foods that used to like own me. I would say they were my master. They make them unattractive, unappealing, which is like crazy. Like that, but that really is my truth. This past week I cut a cake for someone that I love dearly. I cut up a whole sheet cake. And never once did I even think about putting any of that in my mouth. Like it wasn't even like I was using willpower. It was just something I just would never do, just would never dream of doing. And that I only get as a result from doing this work. I could never make myself. I might be able to grin, and like muscle through that experience and say, okay, I'm not going to eat it. I'm not going to eat it. I'm not going to eat it. Maybe I could do that sometimes, right? But what I could never do was make myself not want it. And that's what intensive work with others does. It actually makes me not want it, makes it uninteresting, unappealing. So it says here that intensive work with others is what gives us immunity. And I think that word intensive is pretty important. It's not convenient work. It's not easy work. It's not occasional work. My disease was not convenient. It it wasn't something I did occasionally, and the consequences were anything but easy. So I have to work intensively with people. I have to work hard. Have to work constantly, right? It's called self sacrifice. There has to be a level of self sacrifice here. Um, and if you're thinking that working this program is hard work, it is. I would never tell someone it's not. It is hard work, but so is living with this disease. That was the hardest work of all. For me, living at over 300 pounds was horrendous. There was nothing. It was hard to go to the bathroom, right? That's how hard it was. And even when I wasn't that overweight, it was hard walking around being in prison to my crazy thinking. That was really hard. So, I have a friend that says, yeah, the work is hard, but the pay is great. So the intensive work is hard work, but the pay is phenomenal. And, we can help in ways that no one else can. We have the experience needed for the work. And it's important that we know that the people we are helping, they're sick. They're not bad. This is not like a moral issue. If someone's out there eating, um, we don't treat them like they're bad. We understand that they're very sick. And, next it says life will take on new meaning. To watch people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, to see a fellowship grow up about you, to have a host of friends. This is an experience you must not miss. We know you will not want to miss it. Frequent contact with newcomers and with each other is the bright spot of our lives. So if people say that fellowship is optional, well, not according to this book. It actually says you must not miss it. That's a must here. You must not miss it. Not only do you must not miss it, but it's clear you're not going to want to because it's the bright spot of our lives. So what started out as a necessity grew into a desire. Interestingly enough, right? The food started out like a desire and it grew into a necessity. And working with others starts out like a necessity and it becomes a desire. That's been my experience. Um, and I love nothing more than frequent contact with newcomers and with each other. It really is the bright spot. Our lives begin to have meaning and purpose. That's what happens here. There's an importance to our very existence. We see people get well, we see them help others. We get to be a part of their transformation. And it is exciting and it's fulfilling. The relationships and friendships we meet are the gifts that we never knew were in store for us. I did not come here thinking that I was in need of new friendships. But what a blessing it's been. I have my dearest friends are in this recovery room with me right now. Um, Page 89, it tells us what not to do. Well, don't start out as an evangelist or reformer. And why can't we be that way? After all, we know we found the answer, right? I know I found the answer. Can't I just be an evangelist or a reformer? And I think, well, because it's not helpful, right? And if I'm an evangelist and I'm a reformer, I run the risk of driving people away. And I don't want to drive anybody away because if I drive them away, how am I supposed to help them? Right? So I should not show more enthusiasm for their recovery than they are showing. I should never be more enthusiastic about someone else getting well than they should be about their own necessity to get well. And I think, I love in Bill's story how Ebby showed up to help Bill. He didn't rant and he didn't preach. He was not an evangelist. You know, what Ebby did was um, he came, and interestingly enough, Bill was actually drinking when Ebby showed up. And Ebby did not say to Bill, "Get it together, dude, and I'll come back when you're sober." No. And he didn't say to Bill, "This is what you have to do. This is what you need to do. Do what I do." He just came and he showed up and he said what God had done for him. And he looked and sounded like someone that Bill wanted to emulate, right? That's the way that he showed up. Um, and so page 89 says this: because of your own drinking experience, you can be uniquely useful to other alcoholics. So cooperate, never criticize. To be helpful is our only aim. So, when I read uniquely useful, it means that I have the precise qualifications for this job. What job is that? For the job of helping whomever God puts before me. Might not be the job of helping every single person in the universe, right? But it's helping who God puts before me for however long or short that time might be, right? Um, and that what I love about that is that I have the exact qualifications to be useful. Whatever my experience has been, whatever my truth has been, that's how I can help another person. And what that also tells me is that my struggles were not wasted time. Like all my years struggling, I think of it as my on the job training for a job I didn't know that I was going to be called to do. Right. So it's like that was my internship out there, trying it again and again, trying diet after diet after diet, trying self will and willpower and all the crazy schemes I went through. That was that was like my on the job training. It's my internship. It was my apprenticeship. And it's what allows me to do the work that God has assigned me. Because what I found out is that all of those things, when I share them with another person, I often find what God does is He brings a person who has had similar experiences. And then I'm able to show how I got out from under, right? Page 90 says this: if he does not want to stop drinking, don't waste your time trying to persuade him. You may spoil a later opportunity. Be patient, realizing that you're dealing with a very sick person. And so, again, we're reminded that the person is sick and not bad. And I also like the reminder of be patient. Be patient. Like, don't lose your patience with people. Like, have a calm attitude, a calm demeanor with them. And, how do you know if someone doesn't want to stop? You know, I think about it like this. Oftentimes, sadly, we get or we hear misinformation. Someone is struggling to stop, and they get this, well, you just don't want it. You just don't want it bad enough. And that really wasn't my truth. I wanted it. I always wanted it. I really did want to stop. Um, but not when I was giving excuses, not when I wasn't willing to do the work. So, how do I know if someone doesn't want to stop? My experience is that they try to negotiate. They try to tell you exactly how you're going to work it, exactly how they need to get well. And not that people aren't entitled to their own truth and their own understanding. But what I find is that people who give excuses, give reasons, generally, they don't really want this. You know, um, they won't call on time, right? They'll give excuses, or they may actually tell you that they don't want to stop or they don't feel ready yet. Or they're going to do this. I mean, I know what I used to do, and I've heard this before. I'm going to go on vacation. When I come back, I'll be ready. Okay, yeah, they're not ready. They're not ready. Because if you're still thinking you're going to have an enjoyable vacation while you're eating, you're not where I was. Like, I knew for me, there was no more joy. I was not enjoying it anymore. That that like illusion, that delusion was gone. So when people say, I'm going to start after this holiday, the holiday weekend, or I'll start when the kids start camp, right? Kids start camp and then I'm going to get down to business. Yeah, they don't want to stop. That's been my experience. You know, and we don't waste our time on them. We don't push people and we don't chase them down. Our disease will sell the solution more than we do. Otherwise, what we're doing is merely frothy emotional appeal, right? If I am like trying to get someone to stop, that's frothy emotional appeal. Page 91 says this: see your man alone if possible. At first, engage in general conversation. So ask regular general questions, you know, ask them about their job, what they're, anything about their family. Where do you live? What do you do? Like, have any kids? Are you married? What kind of hobbies do you like? And I think we have to remember that these are people, they're not projects. These are not like, you know, these are human beings. And the idea of getting to know a person is, first of all, how can I help someone if I don't know anything about them? Like, we actually are supposed to get to know people in this. And so after a while, it says, then you turn the talk to some phase of drinking. Tell him enough about your drinking habits, symptoms, and experiences to encourage him to speak of himself. If he wishes to talk, let him do so. You will thus get a better idea of how you ought to proceed. So, the reason we're having this conversation and letting them talk is it's going to give us information how we're going to proceed, how we're going to start, right? What our entry point is going to be with them. If he's not communicative, give him a sketch of your drinking career up until the time you quit, but say nothing for the moment of how that was accomplished. So think about that. So when somebody calls, we're just having general conversations. You're telling about yourself, but you're not telling them what you did to stop. You're not talking about your food plan. You're not even talking about the meetings that you go to. You're not talking about the spiritual solution. You're not talking about your inventory. None of it. You're actually talking about what it was like when you were eating, what it was like when you were eating. You're giving them a sense of what you were like before you had the ability to work with them, what it used to be like for you. And if the person is in a serious mood, you dwell on the troubles that liquor caused you, being careful not to moralize or lecture. If his mood is light, tell him humorous stories of your escapades. Get him to tell some of his. And I think, Bill was an amazing salesman. Like, we can learn so much about how to do this right. Um, and he used his ability to be a good salesperson to help sell the ideas to the alcoholic. So we're getting schooled right now, I think, in the art of selling. When I talk to someone about my eating and dieting habits and experiences, I try to get a sense of what theirs was. I talk about my painful weight fluctuations, how I was certain something was going to fit me, and I'd go in the closet and suddenly nothing fit. And I would be hysterically crying, right? I could tell them about that. I talk about how it actually hurt. The way that I ate physically hurt my body, that I would be sick, laying on the floor, crying, how much my stomach hurt me, missing important social obligations and celebrations like regularly. Basically, if the person is sad and depressed, I take out my saddest stories. I talk about how I missed a friend's funeral because nothing fit. And I was so self conscious, I was afraid her siblings would see how fat I got. So I missed someone I love's funeral, right? And that was really sad. Um, but if the person is laughing, if there's like that nervous laughter, then I tell my stories with a humorous angle. For me, I tell my cabbage soup diet story that I like cooked up a witch's brew. I call it like my witch's brew on Sunday. It was going to be my cure all. I thought it was going to like, I was going to cabbage soup my way into thinness. I never met one person who was ever successful from a cabbage soup diet. I never met one skinny person who did it via cabbage soup, but that was always my Sunday go to. And what it did for me was, right, it gave me the worst gas ever, painful, like diarrhea, right? That was going to be my solution. And I always tell this story that, like, I did this cabbage soup diet and went to a party, and that this boy I liked was sitting next to me, and it sounded like my stomach was making noises that it sounded like I swallowed a cat. It was like my stomach was like meowing, and he even looked at me. I mean, it's hysterical, right? He looked at me like like I was crazy, and I was humiliated. But it's funny. So if someone is joking, I can get in from that angle. We can joke about it, right? And then page 92, I tell him how baffled I was. Like I was so confused that I finally learned that I was sick. Give him an account of the struggles you made to stop, showing the mental twist which leads to the first drink of a spree. And we suggest you do this as we have done it in the chapter on alcoholism. If he is an alcoholic, if he is the real compulsive overeater, he will understand you at once. He will match your mental inconsistencies with some of his own. And to me, again, this really illustrates just how valuable the sufferings of my experiences are. That the way that I sell the solution is I allow the person to see the need for the solution. You know, I heard once, like, if you want to get someone to buy a car, don't convince them how great your car is. Convince them of how important it is that you have a car, right? And that's sort of how it was with this program. It wasn't like I had to convince someone how awesome this program was. What really needed convincing was that I had nothing else, no other solution. I needed this type of a solution. And my suffering was valuable. You know, in the chapter more about alcoholism, it completely drives home the point that if one is a true compulsive overeater, then there is no chance, none, that he can do the job alone. And so I tell all my stories about trying to do it alone, trying to do it my way, how self reliance consistently failed me. And in fact, the chapter more about alcoholism ends with the reminder. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. Page 92, the first full paragraph says this: if you're satisfied that he is a real alcoholic, begin to dwell on the hopeless feature of the malady. So we dwell on the hopeless feature, which means don't tell them that it's going to get better. Don't cheer them up. Show him from your own experience how the queer mental condition surrounding that first drink prevents normal functioning of the willpower. You can explain that your willpower doesn't function normally. You know, so we dwell on the hopelessness of this. We don't go in right away and cheer people up, and try not to discuss it in a lecturing way, but give your experience. So I tell people, about the money I spent on commercial diets, on gym membership, how I would spend a small fortune on prepackaged food, or I had prescription, I'd get a prescription for fen and all the other types of medical solutions, and I would lose some weight and then decide that I should be able to have a slice of pizza with my family because it was Friday night and I always wound up eating 3 slices and then just binging the rest of the night. I also tell people like I had this prescription for fen-phen, which, I got from a doctor who never really even looked at me. And I'm a smart person. I knew that there was something really wrong with that. But I would take medication from someone who hardly looked at me, and it actually made me not want to eat. So, what did I do when I wanted to eat? I didn't take it. How crazy is that? To have a prescription for something, but not take it because the desire to eat was just that strong. And what I do is I stress the me, not the them. So we tell the you, right? When you do it, you, not them. Don't tell them that they're compulsive eaters. Let them come to this conclusion on their own. And when I do it, I always say, like, my experience is this, or my disease is this, or what it looks like for me is this. Never branding someone else a compulsive eater. We let people draw their own conclusions. Page 93 explains what comes next. We really, really want to get them to ask the question. This is like the great question. The question is, what did you do to get well? Right? So you told them your hopeless future. You told them all the things you've done. You've shared like all the craziness, right? But they're looking at you and you don't look like you have this problem anymore. And you sound calm, right? And you're not in the throes of food. Um, you know, you're either at a healthy body weight or working towards it, right? Because by the way, I was sponsoring before I was a healthy body weight because I had recovered before my body caught up. But I sounded well. I sounded well, you know, and I was on my way working towards that. And so we really want to get them to ask the question, what did you do to get well? Because this is the question that gives us the freedom to talk about the spiritual future. But we don't get into a religious discussion. And here are some important points. He does not have to agree with your conception of God. He can choose any conception he likes, provided it makes sense to him. The main thing is that he be willing to believe in a power greater than himself and that he live by spiritual principles. So he has to agree that he's willing to consider that there's something bigger than him that can help him. And he has to start living a better life. He has to start putting those spiritual principles into application at once. What does that mean? It means stop doing the things that you know are wrong. Stop stealing. Stop lying. Stop all abusive acts. Stop your abusive words and start looking for ways to help others. You know, one thing that often needs accentuating is focus on your own behaviors and not on the rest of the world. Because oftentimes when people come in at this point, they have a lot of things that are really pissing them off about everybody. And the real directions we can give people at this point is we're going to focus on you. We're going to focus on you. I realize you might be upset with your husband. You might be upset with your boss. Let's focus on you. Let's make a decision where those things are concerned. You're going to do no harm. You're going to do your best. Of course, if there's abuse happening, if someone is hurting you or your kids, by all means, get up and leave, right? Do not leave yourself in a vulnerable position. But I always say, like, a lot of times, myself included, I had a lot of complaints about the way my husband was doing things with the kids, right? Or doing things around the house. If my kids were not being hurt, my mouth was closed. Mind my own business for now. It's not the time to get all worked up about what your husband is feeding them for dinner, right? Or how he feels about television viewing or any of that stuff. Right now, it's focus on yourself. Focus on yourself. And we don't, No one has to believe in my conception of God, right? They do not have to live, but they have to agree that they're willing to believe in something greater than themselves, right? So when people come in and they say, um, I don't believe in God, is that going to be a problem? I always ask the follow up question: do you want to? Because that is the requirement. You have to want to believe, you have to be willing to want to believe. It does not have to be my conception, but a conception that will solve your problem. Page 94 says this: we're dealing only with general principles common to most denominations. Again, has little to do with specific religions. And what do? We outline the program of action, explaining how you made a self appraisal, how you straightened out your past, and why you are now endeavoring to be helpful to him. And it is important for him to realize that your attempt to pass this on to him plays a vital part in your own recovery. Actually, he may be helping you more than you are helping him. Make it plain that he is under no obligation to you and that you hope only that he will try to help other alcoholics when he escapes his own difficulties. Suggest how important it is that he place the welfare of other people ahead of his own. Make it clear that he is not under pressure, that he needn't see you again if he doesn't want to. You should not be offended if he wants to call it off, for he has helped you more than you have helped him. If your talk has been sane, quiet, and full of human understanding, you may have perhaps made a friend. And I just love this, because we tell the person about the steps, but you really stress the importance of passing it on. And in fact, when we start working with a person, oftentimes at the very beginning of the doctor's opinion, which is where many of us start with people, it clearly mentions this. In fact, it's on the first page of the doctor's opinion. It's in the third paragraph, and it says, as part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. So, I said that Bill was an amazing salesperson, and and how we learned how to sell the solution. Well, he wasn't into tricking anyone either about the terms. Like, this is an honest, upfront deal. So when I work with someone, I let them know right away what the terms of this agreement is. Right off the bat, the person is told that in order to get well and remain well, he will have to help others. There's no tricks here. These are the terms. I always lay them out when I'm working with another, and also tells them that if they're interested in working with me, it means that they will allow me to share their numbers as a source of contact with others who might benefit. Now, it doesn't mean that I, don't respect the confidentiality of the things that we discuss. But if I'm going to sponsor somebody, if I'm going to be willing to take their calls, right, then I believe they ought to be willing to do that with someone else who might need their help in turn. And so we give people a chance to think it over before just agreeing to continue to work. And I always do that. I tell people, because it says it right here, think it over. It makes it really clear that if they don't want to work with me, I won't be upset. Like, I really won't. And if I see them at a meeting or I pass them on the street, they can call me. I will greet them warmly. They can call me anytime as an outreach call. I will still be nice, and we offer them fellowship. The line in here that I just love is, if your talk has been sane, quiet, and full of human understanding, you may have perhaps made a friend. And so we're calm, right? We're calm and we're nice. We're not yelling, and we're not arguing, and we're not bullying. And in fact, um, if a person who's selling the solution is all revved up and worked up and yelling and full of like that like energy of like "Ah," kind of like energy screaming at people, they're not following the directions in this book because the directions are really clear. You're supposed to be calm. You're supposed to be calm. And what I really love is the line that you have perhaps made a friend, because this chapter actually mentions the word friend 16 times. Isn't that interesting? It's no accident. So when people say, I'm not your friend, I'm your sponsor, that's not really what the directions say, is it? It actually says, you're supposed to make a friend. You know, I think what happens is that their definition of friend might need some reworking, because my old definition of friend meant you had to agree with me. And my new definition of friend is not that. My new definition of friend is you have to be someone who tells me the truth, but who does it with kindness, right? Who who shows me where I might be needing some help, but does it in a way that doesn't humiliate me, right? That someone who, if I fall, doesn't close the door on me, right? That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be a friend. And, you know, if 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 it's I'm your sponsor, not your friend, I think that there's a little bit of fear here. There's an like the person is operating from fear. Maybe fear that they won't be respected, fear that they won't be listened to, fear if they're too nice, the person will walk all over them. And I don't find that to be true. I really don't. I think people will listen if they're hopeless, and they will listen if you demonstrate through your demeanor that what you have to share is worth listening to, that if you offer them hope. And so I don't think we have to come from a position of making anybody be afraid. And in fact, fear doesn't work. We're told it only sobers you up for a bit. Also, when you come from that position of fear, it's putting a person at somehow above another person, and we're not above anybody. We are all, whether we're eating or not eating, whether recovered or not recovered, we are all, I believe, children of God, right? We are all just as worthy, just as, important. Um, and so it should never come from a position of fear. Um, and I think sometimes when sponsees say that I'm afraid of you, I think that's a little bit on them, to be honest, too. Because I think what it means is your opinion of me is more important than my integrity. Because oftentimes that's what people say when they're dishonest to their sponsees. They're like, well, I was afraid of you. And I think maybe what you really were afraid of is that there's going to be a consequence that you're not going to like. Like, I might not work with you, right? And that whether someone works with me or not, we're still friendly to them. We're still nice to them. Page 95 says this second paragraph, and then I'm going to stop at this point. It says, if he's not interested in your solution, you may have to drop him until he changes his mind. So, can you tell if someone is not interested in your solution? Well, they won't do any of the work. That's really it. Not because they struggle with the food, but people that negotiate are not interested in your solution. What they're often interested in is in their own solution, right? And so, um, when I make a suggestion to someone and they don't follow it, I usually get an indication that they're not interested in my solution. And at that, I can very kindly say, this is where we have to part ways. I can't This is my experience. I don't have another set of experiences. This is the one that I have to offer. But we always, always offer them friendship and fellowship. And I think even more importantly, when we show people the door, right, that we always make sure that we leave the door open. I was told you leave the porch light on and the welcome mat out so that when someone really is ready, they know where to come and they will be able to come without feeling humiliation, right? And with that, I'll pass. I'll pick it up the next time.
Hey.